Well, that rather nice sky and the view of the car and the light means that it's moth trapping time. This is Eakring. I'm at the side of Lound Wood this evening, hopefully here for a couple of hours to see what comes in. The conditions are really good. Although we've got clear skies, we've got light winds, and it's very warm. There's no need for a jumper tonight. So, as it's getting darker now, it's time to fire up the old generator. Well, the generator started fine. It's just a case of just letting it warm up now. Give it a couple of minutes to get running proper, and then we'll fire up. It's cup of tea time. We're in business. Well, this evening I've got the trap and the sheet set up against the side of this hedge here, just outside of Lound Wood. The hedge runs approximately east to west. The reason I've chose to trap on the edge of the wood, it's always proved successful before. Right, yeah, it's easy or just as worthwhile trapping outside Lound Wood than it is just inside or even in the middle. The species range at certain times can be increased by trapping alongside the wood. And that species range is often increased by the possibility of migrants that come in across the fields and into the light. Now there's a bit of migrant activity at the moment, but I don't really expect anything tonight. But if you don't trap for the aim of migrants or the possibility of migrants, you tend not to get them. But in the absence of migrants, there should be plenty of nice moths to be seen. This is a great place to trap. Lound Wood is private, these fields are private, and I'm the only one that has access. I'm lucky that way. Now here's the first of the moths that I can show you, and this is a male ghost moth. Males are very different to the females. The females are beautifully marked in several tones of light brown with various markings on. The males here are silky white on the forewings, and the thorax and the head are a buff yellow. You'll often see numbers of these moths flying low over grass. Often at the side of the Trent is a good place to see them if you live in Nottinghamshire, and they turn up at dusk. And in fact, the last time I trapped at Sherwood Forest, one of these appeared out of the grass just as I was filming the opening sequence. They're not greatly attracted to light, but if you trap in a grassy habitat, which this is, you will invariably get these. It's a beautiful, beautiful moth. Now here's a lovely moth, and although it's a large size, as large as many macro moths or larger moths, this is technically a micro moth. It's small magpie, which is Anania hortulana in old money, but it's a lovely thing. It's very common, and this will be one of the first moths that you'll get that you trap even in your garden. It's a nice one to to learn and to remember. It's one of those moths that also suffered with a name change a few years ago. But it's a lovely thing. Well, as you can gather from this scene, this is very busy. The big moth that's around the actual light at the moment, that is a male drinker moth. I'd like to show you a drinker moth, but they tend to do what this one's doing now, just charge around endlessly and for no apparent or good reason. They very rarely settle down. It's not usually until late in the night, when they're just absolutely tired out, that they'll plonk themselves down and hunker themselves up. But drinker moth is a moth that will turn up even in garden traps, but in an area of farmland or woodland where there's lots of grassy areas, such as the stewardship set aside scheme here, you'll invariably get a number of drinker moths. They can be quite a nuisance, because say they do just charge around. They are quite large and bullish things. Now there's a moth. I've got one in a pot, a nice that yellowish moth that's just right of the light now, and that is a barred yellow. And barred yellow has to be one of the UK's most beautiful moths. When the one in the pot settles down and sorts itself out, hopefully then I can show you. But as you can see, the trap and around the trap is very busy. For newcomers to moth trapping, this can be a very daunting proposition. Well, as you can see, it's rather busy. There's a few more different species just starting to come in now, but the majority are the same. People often ask me for certain advice, or what's your recommendations. I'm starting to think about getting into moths and trapping moths. Well, my first recommendation is always avoid situations like this. Don't start and trap immediately out in the countryside. You're best to trap from home. You'll get fewer moths that way, and a more manageable amount of moths that you can usually cope with. Rarely in urban gardens will you get scenes like this. The second bit of advice I would impart with is, if you don't like flying insects, don't go out into the middle of nowhere and switch on a great big light like this. That'll be the stuff of nightmares for you if you hate flying insects, because not only moths come in, but a range of flies and wasps, hornets and that in the autumn. Virtually everything is attracted to light. It is mainly moths though, but it is an absorbing hobby. Another bit of advice: don't trap all night. Don't leave your trap on all night. It means you've got to get up very early in the morning and beat the sparrows and everything else to the contents of your catch. I just like to come out here, run the trap for 2 or more hours, log everything as it comes in as best as I can, pack up and go home. Now you'll have to excuse my grubby fingers, but I am trying to hold the ground sheet down in the grass so I can film this beautiful Tortrix. This is green Oak Tortrix, or Tortrix viridana. If you're trapping woodland during the summer, expect a lot of these. It is a very common moth. I've only had it 2 or 3 times, I think, in the garden, and it took a number of years for one to eventually turn up. This one is fresh out. It's a really vibrant green. It's a smashing species and probably our nicest Tortrix, to be honest. I do like green moths. You would think more moths would be green. It certainly aid the camouflage for many species. Now here's an absolutely beautiful moth. Hopefully it won't get mugged by one of the many drinker moths that are turning up now. And this is a barred yellow, but what about that for a moth? I must admit, this is one of my favourites. It's an absolute stonking species, so beautifully marked and coloured with that golden yellow background coloration and those various shades of brown markings across the wings. Altogether, this is a stunning moth. It will turn up in gardens, but it's more common in more rural and agricultural areas like this, and it's certainly one of my favourite moths, and always makes me smile whenever one of these drops in at the light. It's a lovely thing. Well, it was. And here's a slightly more distant scene. As you can see, the sky is darkened and the number of moths that are coming in increases, and so with that increase comes an increase in the variety of species. On nights like this, when conditions are excellent, you can expect lots of moths, a good range of species, and you never know what's going to be in amongst those species. I'm surprised at the moment that we've had no elephant hawk moths, but they'll all of a sudden start thudding in. Maybe we might even be graced by the even larger privet hawk moth. Now that would be something nice to show you. But I have got a selection of moths ready to fill. Now we're back on the trail of green moths again, and this is the aptly named green pug. Pugs have that characteristic resting posture which this one exhibits. Now these always look deceptively green under mercury vapor light, and when you get them home and go to photograph them in daylight, they prove to be somewhat disappointing, and you wonder where all the green's gone. But it's a beautiful species. It's a lovely pug, one of my favourite pugs, largely because for a pug, this is as colourful and gaudy as most pugs get. But it's a lovely thing. This is green pug. It will occur in your urban garden, so it's one to keep an eye out for. There are a couple of species, other pugs, that can show a hint of green, and well, most notably is slow pug, but that has a different wing shape and sort of posture to me. Green pug is quite unmistakable, although V pug is another of the green pugs to pose potential problems. There's a general idea of what's occurring. Lots of moths, as you can see. There's quite a few micros, although it's disappointing the variety of micros actually. Lots of grass veneers, as there will be, but it's now sort of more interesting fare that's going to start and turn up. It's a case of keeping an eye out for that unusual or special species. Now here's a moth that really is beautifully marked. It's quite subtle in its beauty, and it doesn't show it here, but if we illuminate it a bit better, now you can see perhaps why I like it. I will put a photo into this moth because this doesn't really do the moth justice at all. It really is an absolute stonker of a species. I get these occasionally at home in the garden, so if you run a trap in your garden wherever you live, you can expect this species eventually, but it's a lovely thing. And the caterpillars are equally as beautiful. They're green and lichen coloured and blend in to lichens as well. I found the caterpillar on a couple of occasions early in the spring, but I do love the adult moth. This is a beautiful species, and also beautiful hook tip. Now there's moths and there's moths, and here is a moth. This is a peach blossom, and what a beauty of a moth this is. This is another species that I'll put a photo in because basically this situation just doesn't do this moth justice. It really is a stunning species. These lighter markings or circular markings that you can see are tinged with pink. That pink is more evident on those that have recently hatched. This is another moth again that will turn up pretty much everywhere. It'll turn up at your garden trap, but rarely in numbers. It's usually just sort of singles or twos and threes. I thought this one was going to do a runner, but it seems to settle down. No, it hasn't. It's getting ready for off again. But I do love peach blossom, and it's another species that shows you the variety and colours of our UK moths. Well, it did while it was there. Well, it's just fast approaching midnight already. I have no intention of packing up yet. The number of moths is still ever increasing. There's no let up, as there usually isn't on nights like this where it is humid and the conditions are just right. There's plenty of moths continually coming in, but nothing outstanding yet. I say yet because on one of my frequent checks around the light to see what has come in, maybe I've missed something, which you invariably do, especially when you've got lots of moths and you're trying to record those moths and log them down. You miss something. And it's surprising how many times you can go around to the other side of the light and have a look, and there's the moth of your dreams plonked on the side of it. But the species that's coming in has changed a lot. There's less of the grass veneers now, so there's fewer crambids. The species that is probably coming in more now is common wainscot. But that's how it goes. There's a couple of clays here as well, dark arches turning up. But I do have one really special marked moth that's a real cracker. It's one of those moths that sort of does your eyes in, and I'll show it you now. And here is that moth, and this is the beautiful scorched wing. We've been quite fortunate tonight. We've got some really nice moths, and this isn't a moth that we've ever got here in numbers at Eakring. Sherwood Forest, you can get quite a lot of these, and this is a beautiful specimen. It's very fresh, and it's a scorched wing. This is a moth. I'll put a photo in probably while I'm waffling on, and you'll see more what I mean. But the very fine sort of striations and lines across the wing give this moth the appearance of the wings vibrating. It does that more than any other moth does at all. It's quite uniquely marked, this, and it's a very attractive moth. It's an absolute beauty. And this is scorched wing. It will turn up in urban gardens and certainly suburban gardens occasionally. I've had one record at Warsaw, but it's a lovely thing. There's the general scene. Still plenty of moths come in and still no hawk moths. It's amazing. I've had about 5 elephant hawk moths come in within about an hour. They often don't appear. See that bat then? That bat that sort of came in low and swooped down towards us on the left hand side of the screen. I think you might be able to make it out. That's the only trouble with moth trapping. It can end up being a feast for bats. You'll always end up with 1 or 2 bats quite close to you. There's something big lurking around, but I think it's time to have another look to see what's arrived on the sheet. Now hopefully this will stay and not get disturbed, but here's another lovely moth, quite appropriately called a blood vein, and it's not hard to see why. Its general ground colour is a nice straw colour, and it has quite a unique sort of wing shape to it, this moth. It's a lovely moth. You'll get it occasionally, 1s and 2s at max at any sort of one trapping session. But I do love this. I love that sort of dark red straight line across the wings, or angled across the forewing and hind wings, and then that edging of pinkish red to the trailing edges and outer edges of the wings. It's a lovely species. We do have some lovely moths in this country. They're not all big, brown and hairy, you know. Well, it's time for one more check around the light, see if anything else has just dropped in. Otherwise, it's the usual pack up routine, except with more moths. We're going to try and shift off the sheet and off around the light. It's been a profitable couple of hours. And that, as they say, is that.